Most sports anime are about becoming number one, chasing trophies, breaking records, proving everyone wrong, standing at the top after years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We all love a good underdog story. But every once in a while, a story comes along that isn't asking, can I become the greatest? But instead it asks something far more important. Who are you when the world has already decided your place? That's exactly where Megalo Box comes in. Before Joe throws his first punch, before he steps into the ring, before anyone even knows his name, Megalo Box has already told us who's supposed to win. Not because the strongest fighter has already been chosen, but because the world itself has already decided who gets to matter. The first thing Megalo Box wants you to notice isn't the boxing, it's the divide. On one side, there's the city. It's spotless. It has skyscrapers, dazzling lights, cutting-edge technology, and arenas packed with thousands of cheering fans. This is where champions are celebrated, corporations make fortunes, and the wealthy watch the sport from a distance, treating every fight like another spectacle. On the other side is the slums. Rusted metal, cramped homes, broken streets, and people simply trying to survive another day. Here, boxing isn't entertainment, it's survival. There is no roaring crowds, no sponsors, no glory, just underdog rings where lives are gambled away for enough money to make it to tomorrow. Joe doesn't just come from a different neighborhood, he comes from an entirely different world. And that's the difference. And that difference is reflected in the most iconic part of the entire series, the gear. On the surface, gear is simply a mechanical frame that enhances a fighter's strength and speed, of course. But it means so much more than that. Gear represents privilege. The fighters with the best gear aren't just stronger, they have access to the best engineers, the newest technology, medical teams, corporate backing, and every single opportunity to succeed. The gear is polished, customized, continuously improved upon because someone believes they're worth investing in. Meanwhile, people at the bottom either make do with outdated equipment, patch together machines, or have no gear worth speaking of at all. They're expected to compete in a game whose rules were designed by people far richer than they are. The gap between fighters isn't just measured in skill, it's measured in opportunity. That's why Joe's decision to fight as Gearless Joe becomes so powerful. He isn't simply rejecting a piece of equipment. He's rejecting the idea that his worth is determined by what he owns. Every victory is a challenge to society that believes greatness can be bought, engineered, or manufactured. Even the architecture reinforces this message. The wealthy literally live above everyone else, surrounded by clean steel, towering buildings, and endless light, while the poor remain below, hidden behind rushed fences and forgotten streets, almost as if society would just rather pretend they don't exist. The physical distance between these places mirrors the social distance between the people who inhabit them. This is why Megalo Box feels so different from other sports anime. The tournament isn't just finding out who the strongest boxer is. It's about exposing a world where the fight was never meant to be fair in the first place. Joe's story doesn't begin with a dream. Unlike most sports anime protagonists, he doesn't enter the ring because he wants to become the greatest. He doesn't have a childhood promise to fulfill, a rival to surpass, or a championship he's been chasing his entire life. He fights because fighting is all he has. When we first meet him, he isn't even called Joe. He's known as Junk Dog, literally a nickname that strips away his individuality and reduces him to an object. The word junk literally refers to something broken, discarded, or forgotten. It isn't just a stage name, it's a reflection of how society sees and views him. He's another disposable boxer in another underground ring, expected to lose whenever someone richer decides he should. What's more heartbreaking is that Joe himself has internalized that role. He doesn't question the fixed fights anymore. He doesn't rebel against the system. Every fight follows the exact same routine. Step into the ring, put on a convincing show, take the fall, collect the money, and repeat. It's a cycle he's become numb to. He's incredibly talented, yet that talent is being wasted because no one around him believes it can amount to anything more. Because before Joe ever faced another fighter, he had to face a system that already decided where he belonged. This is one of the first major ideas Megalo Box presents. Oppression doesn't always rely on force. Sometimes, the most effective prison is convincing someone they were never meant for anything greater. Joe isn't physically trapped, he's psychologically trapped. And then Yuri enters his life. On the surface, Yuri is simply just the champion. However, he represents something much bigger. He's proof that another world exists, a world Joe has never been allowed to be a part of. When Joe impulsively challenges Yuri, it isn't because he actually thinks he can win. He wasn't going to win. It's because for the first time he feels insulted by the role he's been playing. Yuri's response is equally important. Rather than dismissing Joe as another underdog nobody, Yuri recognizes his fighting spirit. That brief acknowledgement becomes the catalyst for Joe's entire transformation. Sometimes all it takes is one person believing you're capable of more than you've allowed yourself to believe. From that moment onward, Joe makes the first truly independent decision of his entire life. He chooses to fight on his own terms, and this is exactly where the name Gearless Joe becomes so significant. Sorry to interrupt. I'd really appreciate it if you guys could like and subscribe, maybe even leave a comment about what I can talk about next, or if you feel like I missed any details, you're more than welcome to add them in the comments. I only recently started my YouTube channel, and the first video I released was about Slam Dunk. I might remake that video later on because I feel like I left out a lot of things and I didn't like how I edited the video. But yeah, if you could, can you please drop a like and subscribe? That would really help me out a lot. Thank you. Most nicknames in sports celebrate a fighter's greatest strength, while Joe's name does the absolute opposite. It highlights exactly what he lacks. At first glance, gearless sounds almost like an insult. In a world where gear determines a lot of things like status, prestige, success, and of course introducing yourself by what you lack seems almost self-defeating. But Joe transforms that exact weakness into an identity. Instead of hiding his disadvantage, he embraces it. Instead of pretending to fit into the system, he openly rejects it. By calling himself Gearless Joe, he forces the audience, the media, and even his opponents to confront an uncomfortable question. If a man without gear can compete with the best, then maybe gear was never the true measure of greatness. Joe's greatest strength isn't his speed or his punching power. It is authenticity. He never changes himself to fit the expectations of the people around him. Even after gaining popularity, sponsors, and recognition, he never abandons the values that brought him there. He doesn't become a celebrity chasing fame. He remains a boxer chasing something far more personal: the freedom to decide who he is. Another fascinating aspect about Joe is how little he actually speaks. Unlike most protagonists, Joe rarely explains his emotions or delivers long speeches about his dreams. He's quiet, observant, and emotionally reserved. The audience learns who he is through his choices rather than his words. He chooses to keep fighting when every logical reason says he should stop. He chooses to trust Nembu despite having every reason not to. My guy, I would have not trusted that guy. That guy was sketchy as hell. He chooses to fight without gear despite knowing the odds. His actions become his language. Joe's restraint makes his determination feel more genuine because it isn't expressed through dialogue. It's expressed through sacrifice. Joe's growth also isn't measured in strength alone. At the beginning of the series, he's fighting only because it's the only thing he knows. As the story progresses, the motivation changes. He begins fighting to prove that his life has value. Then he fights to honor Nemu's belief in him. Finally, he fights because he realizes other people have started believing in him too. By the time he reaches the final match with Yuri, Joe is no longer carrying only his dream alone. He's carrying the hopes of everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. Perhaps the most beautiful part about Joe's character is that he never truly defeats the system. The inequality still exists. The wealthy remain wealthy, the poor remain poor, the corporations continue to hold power, but Joe accomplishes something arguably more important. He proves that the system can be challenged. Every person watching Joe's fight sees someone from the bottom, standing toe-to-toe with the very best. For a very brief moment, the invisible barriers separating classes disappear. Joe doesn't change the world through speeches or politics. He changes it simply by refusing to stay where the world told him he belonged. That's why Joe isn't inspiring because he's the strongest. He's inspiring because he refuses to let circumstances define his identity. His greatest victory isn't winning matches. It's reclaiming his name. It's proving that no matter what the world calls you, whether it's junk dog, nobody, disposable, or even worthless, you always have the power to decide who you are. And that's why Joe is one of the greatest protagonists in sports anime. I'm saying that now. I'm putting it down on my mom. Okay, not on my mom. Okay. I'm putting it down. He's not fighting to become someone else. He's fighting to become himself. At first glance, Yuri seems like the exact opposite of Joe. Joe is poor, Yuri is wealthy. Joe fights in forgotten underground rings, Yuri fights in front of thousands. Joe has nothing to lose, while Yuri has everything. On paper, Yuri is everything Joe literally wants to become. But Megalo Box reveals that Yuri is just as trapped as the man trying to challenge him, Joe. The difference is that Joe is trapped by poverty, while Yuri is trapped by expectation. Yuri isn't simply the champion because he's talented. He's the face of Kyoto Heavy Industries, the biggest corporation in Megalo Boxing. Every victory he earns it's not just he is alone. It's a victory for the company, its technology, its investors, and the image they've carefully built around him. To the public, Yuri is a legend. To Kyoto, he's an investment. This is what makes Yuri such an interesting character. Even though he stands at the very top of society, very, very little of his life actually belongs to him. The gear he wears perfectly represents this. For most fighters, gear is a tool. For Yuri, it's a cage. His gear is considered the greatest ever created. It represents the pinnacle of technology, years of research, and millions of dollars invested. It has become inseparable from his identity. People don't just admire Yuri, they admire the machine attached to him. The world also begins to ask the wrong question. They don't ask whether Yuri is the greatest fighter, whether he feels like he's the most technically gifted. No, they ask whether Shirato has created the greatest ever gear, and that distinction becomes incredibly important. Every one of Yuri's victories reinforces the belief that technology creates champions. His fists become advertisements. His body becomes a billboard. Every single title defense strengthens the corporation's reputation far more than it does his own. In many ways, Yuri stops being seen as a person. He literally becomes a product. That's why his fascination with Joe begins almost immediately. Joe represents everything Yuri has lost. Freedom. Joe answers to no corporation. He fights because he chooses to. He wins because of his own ability. When Yuri watches Gearless Joe fight, he isn't simply impressed of his courage. He's reminded of what boxing is supposed to be. Two people stepping into a ring with nothing to hide behind except themselves. This is why Yuri never looks down on Joe. Everyone else sees an underground junkyard boxer. Yuri sees another fighter. He understands something nobody else does. If Joe can defeat gear while fighting without gear, then every single one of Yuri's wins and achievements will be questioned. Was it Yuri who won, or was it the machine? The question begins to haunt him. The closer Joe gets to the championship, the more Yuri starts questioning the very system that made him famous. Yuri's internal conflict reaches its peak before Yuri and Joe's final fight. Yuri makes a very big decision that shocks the entire world. He has his gear surgically removed. On the surface, it looks like a gesture of respect towards Joe, but it's much deeper than that. Joe spends the series trying to escape the identity of Junk Dog. Yuri spends the entire series as well trying to escape the identity of Kyoto's champion. Both men are trying to become more than the labels they've been given. For the first time in years, Yuri chooses himself over the expectations placed upon him. He rejects the corporation. He rejects the technology. He literally rejects the identity the world built for him. He wants to know the answer to the question that's haunted him for years. If you strip everything away, who am I? In that moment, Yuri's journey mirrors Joe's. One fights to prove he belongs at the top. The other one fights to prove he deserves to stand there without relying on the very same thing that made him famous. That's why the final match is so much more than just a championship match. It's the first time either man enters the ring as his true self. No expectations, no masks, no predetermined roles, just two boxers searching for the same answer. Who are they when everything else is taken away? That's what makes Yuri one of the greatest rivals in sports anime. Yuri isn't an obstacle standing in Joe's way. He's a reflection of what Joe could have become if he allowed the world to define him. And Joe becomes a reflection of everything Yuri has forgotten. The freedom to fight because it's your own choice. The freedom to lose because you gave everything. The freedom to decide for yourself who you are. In the end, Yuri doesn't lose because he was weaker. He wins something far more valuable. For the first time in his life, the man standing in the ring isn't Kyoto's champion. He's just simply Yuri. Now hear me out. I would have continued to analyze more characters, but this is a video essay, not a character analysis. But if you do want me to make a part 2 where I talk about other characters, I'd be more than welcome to. Just let me know if you guys want it in the comments and I'll do that for you. Once again, I would really appreciate you like, subscribe, and well, wait for the next video. It's coming out next week Saturday. I'm going to try and release every Saturday. But thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you next time.